Hello, dear YouTube viewers. I hope you're doing well. Okay, let's start our video. 10 years of marriage felt like both a lifetime and a fleeting moment. He could still remember the nervous young man who had stumbled through his vows, holding her hands with trembling fingers and a heart full of certainty. Together, they had faced the years with all their storms, job losses, tight finances, the struggles of raising children, even the near collapse that almost tore them apart 5 years in. Yet somehow, they had always managed to find their way back to each other. Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating that journey, about reminding themselves and everyone else that love could endure, bend, and still stand tall. He had been planning the evening for weeks. Every detail mattered. He booked the most elegant restaurant in the city, one known for its intimate glow, where chandeliers cast golden light across polished wooden tables and soft music seemed to wrap around each guest like silk. He arranged for close friends and family to join, not as witnesses to a performance, but as companions in a shared memory. He wanted laughter, warmth, clinking glasses, and the joy of people who had seen them grow as a couple. In his heart, he imagined raising a toast that would rekindle the spark that had once burned so brightly. Tonight, I want to remind her why we began this journey, he thought, practicing words silently as he buttoned his shirt earlier that evening. As the guests arrived, the atmosphere filled with exactly the kind of lightness he had hoped for. Laughter spilled across the table, mingling with the faint scent of roses placed in delicate vases. Waiters moved quietly in the background, serving drinks that shimmered in crystal glasses. Their closest friends embraced them warmly, offering congratulations, little jokes about how rare it was to see a marriage last this long, playful teasing about their early days together. It should have felt perfect. To everyone else, it probably did. Yet beneath the soft glow of the restaurant's lights, he noticed a crack in the perfection. His wife smiled when she needed to, but there was something behind it, something that didn't quite reach her eyes. She leaned into conversations just enough to appear engaged, but her hand, almost without thought, kept sliding under the table where her phone rested. At first, he brushed it off. Maybe work, maybe family, maybe nothing at all. But as the evening unfolded, it became harder to ignore. The flicker of the screen caught his eye once, then again. She tilted the phone slightly away from him, her thumb moving quickly before tucking it back into her lap. He tried to shake it away. Tonight wasn't the night to give in to suspicion. Tonight was about joy, about celebrating what they had built. Still, every stolen glance at the phone, every delay in her gaze when he caught her eye, every too quick laugh at a joke that didn't quite land, chipped away at the image he had created for the evening. A seed of doubt, small but insistent, planted itself in his chest. And though he smiled, though he laughed when everyone else laughed, part of him began to wonder if this celebration would end the way he had imagined, or if it was the beginning of something entirely different. He raised his glass and tried to keep his smile steady, but inside his thoughts spun like a wheel he couldn't slow down. Every time her hand disappeared beneath the tablecloth, a part of him itched to reach across, pull the phone away, and demand to see what she was hiding. Another part of him urged restraint. Don't ruin the night. Don't embarrass her. Don't embarrass yourself. This was their anniversary, after all. It was supposed to be a celebration of the years they had endured together. Yet even as laughter rippled around the table, he could feel himself slipping into a space where every detail of her behavior seemed amplified, heavy with meaning. Flashes of the past crept into his mind, uninvited but unavoidable. He remembered the first time he noticed her stepping out of their bedroom late at night, phone glowing faintly in her hand as she whispered, "Just work stuff. Go back to sleep." He had believed her, or at least told himself he did. Then came the mornings when she seemed distant, distracted, as though her body sat across the breakfast table, but her thoughts were miles away. Even her affection had shifted. Her kisses became quicker, her hugs lighter, like gestures she performed out of habit rather than desire. At the time, he had convinced himself that marriages went through phases, that exhaustion, stress, and routine were to blame. Tonight, with the glow of her screen flickering under the table, those excuses began to feel painfully thin. The table conversation turned toward their marriage, and their guests kind, smiling, oblivious. spoke of them as if they were a fairy tale come true. One friend said, "You two are proof that real love lasts." Another chimed in, "I still remember your wedding. You couldn't take your eyes off each other." Their words should have warmed him, but instead they cut deep because he couldn't ignore how little they matched what he was seeing. When asked to share her favorite memory from their years together, his wife chuckled and replied, "Oh, I don't even know. There are too many." Her voice was sweet, her words harmless, but he caught the hollowness in her tone. She didn't mention the trip they'd taken to the mountains, where they had laughed like teenagers again. She didn't recall the night they stayed up until dawn after their first child was born, marveling at the tiny life they had created. She gave them nothing real, just a safe, empty answer to keep the moment moving. And while the guest smiled, he felt his stomach knot. Her hand moved again, quick and practiced, slipping beneath the tablecloth. He noticed the subtle twitch of her fingers, the way her eyes glazed just for a second as she read whatever appeared on her screen. She laughed at something someone said, but her laugh was a beat late, her attention fractured. He realized then that she wasn't truly with him or with their guests. Her thoughts belonged to whoever waited on the other end of those glowing messages. The moment came suddenly, sharp as glass. As a waiter leaned over to refill their wine, the angle shifted just enough for him to glimpse the illuminated screen. He hadn't meant to look, but once he saw it, he couldn't unsee. The message preview was short, vague, but damning all the same. "Can't wait till later." His pulse thundered in his ears. Later? Later when? Later with who? He felt the blood drain from his face, though he forced his body to remain still, his expression carefully neutral. The room around him blurred for a heartbeat. The laughter of friends, the clinking of glasses, the soft music, all distant noise to the explosion in his chest. He wanted to confront her, to grab the phone right then and there, but instinct told him not to. To call her out in front of everyone without proof, without control, would only make him look like a jealous fool. Instead, he took a slow breath, forcing air into lungs that felt like stone. He reminded himself of the toast he had planned, the words he had rehearsed. Only now, they would not serve as a gentle reminder of love, but as a sharpened blade of truth. He would not scream. He would not rage. He would not give her the satisfaction of chaos. No, he would do something far more powerful. He would speak with dignity, in front of everyone she thought she was fooling. He would let his words carry the weight of what he now knew. And in doing so, he would force her to reveal the truth she thought she could keep hidden. The seed of doubt planted earlier that night had bloomed into certainty. By the end of this dinner, one way or another, their lives would no longer look the same. He sat there with his hands folded on the table, every muscle in his body taut with restraint. The words were burning inside him, pressing against his chest, demanding release. She's texting someone who can't wait to see her later. The thought replayed again and again, a cruel echo that poisoned every moment. Anger swelled in him like a storm, violent and urgent, urging him to stand up, grab the phone, and end the charade in front of everyone. Yet just as quickly as the fury rose, dignity whispered back. If he exploded now, the night would descend into chaos, and everyone would see a husband unravel rather than a wife exposed. That was not what he wanted. He wanted the truth to cut through the air, undeniable and elegant, not messy and easily dismissed. So he bit down on his rage and chose silence for now. But it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of calculation, of a man who had decided that when he spoke, his words would pierce deeper than shouting ever could. He rehearsed the rhythm of his speech in his head, adjusting it, shaping it. Tonight, he would let her reveal herself, not through what she said, but through the look on her face when she realized that he knew. The dinner continued, plates arriving one after another in a blur of fine dining. A creamy soup with herbs sprinkled delicately across the surface. A main course of roasted lamb, its aroma filling the air. A dessert cart wheeled past with pastries glistening under the soft glow of chandeliers. Around the table, the guests remained blissfully unaware of the battle raging inside him. They laughed at old stories, clinked their glasses in cheers, teased the couple about being relationship goals. To them, this was just another joyous night. To him, every laugh felt like a cruel contrast, a spotlight on the lie unraveling at his own table. She played her part well, at least for the audience. Her smile was soft, her gestures graceful, but he saw the tiny fractures in her performance. The way she shifted her chair slightly, just enough to angle herself away from his line of sight when her hand moved again toward the phone. The way she avoided holding his gaze for longer than a few seconds, as if afraid of what he might read in her eyes. If their guests noticed anything at all, they would have mistaken it for simple distraction. But he saw it for what it was, guilt disguised as charm. The irony stung him. Here they sat, surrounded by people who believed they were witnessing a love worth celebrating, while in reality, he was witnessing the unraveling of trust in real time. He almost pitied the guests for their innocence, for their blind faith in what they thought they knew. The laughter around him grew louder, brighter, but in his mind, it only heightened the silence building inside. The evening neared its peak when the wine glasses were refilled, and the candles burned lower, their flames flickering gently against the soft hum of background music. One of their oldest friends, slightly tipsy and full of cheer, raised his glass and said, "Come on, it's time for the man of the hour to say a few words. Let's hear from the husband. It's your anniversary after all." The request sent a shiver down his spine. This was it, the stage he hadn't asked for but had been silently preparing for all night. His heart pounded, his throat dry, and for a moment he wondered if his voice would even hold steady. He looked at her then, really looked. She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. He knew she was expecting a sweet, predictable speech about love and gratitude, the kind that would let her glide through the evening unscathed. He rose slowly, the chair sliding back against the polished floor with a quiet scrape. His glass trembled slightly in his hand, but not from weakness, rather from the enormity of what he was about to do. As he looked out at the faces of friends and family, he felt both the weight of love and the sting of betrayal. Both emotions clashed in his chest, making his voice tremble with a mixture of sincerity and hurt when he finally began to speak. 10 years, he said softly, his gaze sweeping across the table. 10 years of building, of fighting, of loving, of trying. Tonight, I thought about everything we've endured together, and I wanted to remind us all of why we started this journey. The room quieted, every laugh fading into attentive silence. He could feel her eyes on him now, and though he didn't look directly at her, he knew she was listening carefully. He allowed a pause, the kind that draws people in, and in that silence, he steadied himself for what was to come. His toast would not be what anyone expected. He lifted his glass, the crystal catching the glow of the chandeliers, and for a moment he allowed himself to slip into the role everyone expected of him. His voice, though trembling inside, came out warm and steady. 10 years ago, he began, I stood at an altar with the woman I loved more than anything in the world. My hands were shaking, my voice was cracking, and yet, in that moment, I had never been more certain of anything in my life. I knew that whatever storms would come, whatever burdens would weigh us down, I wanted to face them with her by my side. Around the table, smiles spread like ripples in water. A few guests chuckled softly, remembering their wedding day. Someone dabbed at their eyes with a napkin. His words, rich with sincerity, worked exactly as expected. He continued, weaving their history into the toast. It hasn't always been easy. We've had nights where we questioned if love was enough, days when the weight of the world seemed heavier than we could carry. But every time, we came back to each other. Every time, we remembered why we started. The warmth in his tone made the guests lean closer, drinking in the words like wine. His wife even let out a small laugh, a genuine one, and for the first time that evening her shoulders relaxed. She believed him. She believed that this was going to be another traditional, sentimental speech about love and resilience. She thought the storm brewing inside him was hidden away. He let the moment breathe. He wanted her to feel safe, to sink into that illusion, before he guided them all to the turn no one was expecting. But tonight, he said, lowering his voice slightly, letting it take on a different weight, I noticed something. The air shifted instantly. The smiles lingered but faltered at the edges, uncertain of what was coming. His wife's expression flickered, just for a second, But it was enough. She straightened in her chair, her hand retreating quickly from where it had been resting in her lap. He continued, his words careful, deliberate, layered with meaning. Anniversaries are about more than flowers and champagne. They're about honesty. They're about loyalty. They're about looking each other in the eye and saying, I'm here fully, with nothing hidden. That's what trust is, the invisible thread that holds two people together when everything else tries to pull them apart. A stillness settled over the table. The laughter that had filled the room earlier now seemed impossibly distant, replaced by an uneasy silence. He glanced briefly at her, just long enough to see her lips press into a thin line, her face pale beneath the glow of the candles. And yet, he pressed on, his tone calm but unyielding. When someone spends their anniversary night hiding messages beneath the table, it says more than words ever could. The gasp was audible. A murmur spread quickly through the guests as heads turned, eyes darting between husband and wife. His wife stiffened, her back rigid, her smile frozen in place, as if she could will the moment away. Her hand twitched near the phone still resting in her lap, a silent betrayal she could not undo. He did not raise his voice, did not point, did not accuse. That was not necessary. The truth had already been spoken in a way that allowed everyone at the table to draw their own conclusions. This toast, he said after a heavy pause, his voice steady as stone, isn't just for our past. It's for the truth that must guide our future. Because without truth, there is nothing worth celebrating. With that, he raised his glass slightly, holding it in the air for just a beat longer than tradition required, then set it down with a soft but final thud against the polished table. The sound rang louder in the silence than it should have, like a gavel striking to end a trial. No one moved. No one spoke. The room was wrapped in thick quiet, broken only by the faint clinking of silverware being nervously set aside. Guests stared into their glasses, some unable to look at her, others stealing cautious glances at him. His wife sat frozen, her face a mask of forced composure, but her eyes betrayed her. They were wide, searching, cornered. In that silence, the balance of power shifted. He had not needed to shout, nor demand an explanation. His words alone had done what he intended, laid bare the truth, without spectacle, without denial strong enough to cover it. The dinner, the laughter, the carefully built image of a perfect evening, all of it evaporated in that single moment, leaving behind only the raw weight of what had been revealed. The silence after his glass touched the table seemed to stretch on forever. No one dared move, as though even the scrape of a chair would shatter the fragile air between them. A few of the guests shifted in their seats, their faces caught somewhere between confusion and dawning realization. One woman lowered her eyes to her plate, tracing the rim of her wine glass with a trembling finger. Another man leaned slightly to the side, as though to distance himself from the invisible storm crackling between husband and wife. A nervous cough broke the stillness. It came from one of their oldest friends, who cleared his throat and mumbled something about the food being excellent, his voice thin and uncertain. No one laughed. No one followed his lead. Instead, all eyes drifted, unbidden, toward the wife, whose hand still lingered suspiciously close to her lap. The faint outline of the phone beneath the tablecloth might as well have been a spotlight, illuminating the very thing no one wanted to acknowledge. She forced a laugh then, high-pitched and brittle. "Oh, come on," she said, waving her hand as though brushing away a joke. "You know how dramatic he can be. He's teasing." But her smile was stretched too tight, and her eyes darted quickly across the faces staring back at her, searching for an ally and finding none. The husband remained silent, his posture calm, his expression unreadable. That silence was more powerful than any accusation. It allowed the guests to fill in the gaps themselves, and what they imagined was far worse than what he could have shouted. The wife tried again, her words stumbling out faster now, desperation creeping into her tone. "It was work. I was just answering a quick message. You know how it is. Things can't wait sometimes." She laughed again, but it faltered into a weak cough. "You're overreacting." But the faces around the table betrayed disbelief. A few raised their brows ever so slightly. One woman whispered to another, their heads bent close, though the whisper wasn't nearly quiet enough to be hidden. The energy in the room had shifted completely. The guests weren't celebrating anymore. They were witnesses. The husband finally spoke, his voice low, calm, but steady enough to cut through every excuse. I didn't say what the messages were. I didn't need to. His gaze moved slowly around the table, then back to her. All I said was that the truth matters more than appearances. That's not something anyone can laugh away. His composure was striking. Where she fumbled, he remained unshaken, and that difference was enough to tilt the balance of judgment. In the eyes of their friends and family, it was clear who stood with dignity and who sat exposed. She opened her mouth again, perhaps to protest, perhaps to cry, but no words came. The silence reclaimed the table, heavy and unrelenting. Glasses of wine sat untouched, plates of food cooled, and in that quiet, every guest knew the celebration was over, though the night itself was far from finished. The ride home was drenched in silence, the kind that pressed against the windows and made the air feel heavier than it should. Streetlights flashed across the windshield in brief intervals, cutting her face into pieces of shadow and light. She stared out the passenger side window, arms crossed, lips pursed so tightly they were almost colorless. He kept his hand steady on the wheel, though his grip betrayed the storm still surging inside him. Finally, she snapped. "You humiliated me," she spat, her voice sharp enough to slice through the quiet. "In front of everyone we know. You made me look like a fool. Was that your plan? To embarrass me on our anniversary?" He let the words hang in the air before answering, his voice calm but unyielding. "I didn't humiliate you. You humiliated yourself when you couldn't respect our night, when you couldn't even put your phone away long enough to honor 10 years of marriage." His tone was even, but each word struck with precision. She flinched, her arms tightening around herself. "It wasn't what you think. It was just talking. I needed someone to listen. You've been so distant lately, so caught up in everything else." Her defenses cracked as the words tumbled out, half-formed and desperate. "It wasn't physical. Not yet. Not yet." The words hung in the car like smoke, thick and suffocating. His heart twisted, not because he hadn't expected something like this, but because hearing her confirm it stripped away the last threads of denial he had clung to. "So it was an affair," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Emotional, physical, it doesn't matter. You chose lies over love." She turned toward him then, tears threatening in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't plan it. It just—" He shook his head, cutting her off gently but firmly. "We all make choices, and you made yours." The rest of the drive passed without another word, the truth between them louder than any argument could ever be. By the time they pulled into their driveway, the clarity had settled in. Whatever came next, one thing was undeniable. The marriage they had celebrated that night was not the marriage that still existed. The house felt foreign when they stepped inside, as though the walls themselves knew the weight of what had just unraveled. She went upstairs without another word, leaving her heels by the door and her perfume lingering faintly. In the air, he stood in the entryway, staring at the framed photos lining the hallway, smiling faces from vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings, images of a life built together, but suddenly hollow, like paintings of strangers wearing masks of joy. He sat down at the dining table, the same one where they'd shared countless meals, and let the quiet wrap around him. His chest felt heavy, but in that heaviness there was also a strange clarity. He thought of the words she had admitted, "Not yet," words that carried the weight of betrayal, even if she insisted it hadn't crossed certain lines. Did it matter? To him, the answer was already clear. Staying would mean years of second-guessing, of wondering who was on the other end of each message, of never trusting her laughter, her glances, her words. Staying would mean living in suspicion, and that wasn't love. That was prison. For 10 years, he had fought for their marriage, through hardship and struggle, through nights when it seemed easier to walk away. But love could not live where truth had died. Tonight had taught him that, and as much as his heart ached, he knew he would rather walk away with dignity than stay shackled to betrayal. He closed his eyes, remembering the silence at the restaurant after his toast. That moment was etched into him, the way every guest had looked at her, the way she had stiffened, the way the truth had filled the room without him needing to shout. It wasn't rage that had spoken for him. It was composure. That was his victory. He hadn't lowered himself to her lies. He had risen above them. As dawn began to lighten the sky outside, he finally rose from the table. He didn't know exactly what the future would hold. Divorce papers, separate houses, lonely mornings, but he knew one thing. It would be honest. And honesty, even in solitude, was worth more than a lifetime of lies. He thought of the lesson buried inside the pain. Trust is fragile, easier to break than to mend. Silence can shield for a while, but sooner or later, truth must be spoken, no matter the cost. Tonight, he had spoken it. Not with anger, not with chaos, but with the steady weight of dignity. He exhaled slowly, feeling strength stir within him, quiet but resolute. Sometimes, the loudest thing you can say is the truth spoken calmly, in front of everyone. And with that thought, he knew his life, his real life, was only just beginning. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe. Our channel Awesome Visual Story.